Now, good news tomorrow, probably, for those of us that are trying to pay off a home loan because we borrowed too much because that house was just so much more beautiful than the one that we were already in. Well, this is something that about 30% of Australians know something about. 30% of Australia is paying off the house they're living in, 30% is paying off is renting, and another 30% have already paid off their home. So tomorrow, the expectation is that when the Reserve Bank meets again, they're going to cut rates.
Markets today are still pricing in 3 interest rate cuts this year. Tomorrow, that's the first.
I would say that, all bets are probably on rate cut tomorrow.
I think the RBA will deliver one tomorrow.
Well, the Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee meets this week and it looks like there'll be a rate cut.
All of the big 4 banks are expecting the Reserve Bank to cut the official rate tomorrow.
Now, the reality is that in all of the wreckage of the federal election, there is one thing that was absolutely clear. That third of Australia that was paying off its mortgage was under maximum stress. It had had 13 interest rates since the start of things back in May of 2022. February, it ever so slightly dropped, but the financial pain still remains absolutely huge. You know that, and I know that. And to give you an illustration of this being probably the most significant group that made its movement and change of mind during the election, before the rate cut, the Liberal Party was leading, according to Redbridge, with those whom were paying off their homes, 51 to 49. After the rate cut in February, it became 50-50. After the panic around the Trump tariffs, which of course resulted in a stock market fall that has now been completely erased. In fact, the market is higher than when it started to fall, but don't tell anyone. By then it was too late. Because the Labor Party had taken a lead 53-47 and eventually 55-45 with people who were paying off their homes. And debt was a point that I was trying to make to you last week, but we got interrupted by live events. So I want to continue on with that point about how debt does and doesn't play a role in modern Australian politics. Now, Jim Chalmers, as we know, made a lot of debt when he was the shadow treasurer, $1 trillion of Liberal debt, $1 trillion of Liberal debt. But you know now that this year, Australia racks up $1 trillion of debt under the Labor Party. It then becomes almost 1.1, then it becomes 1.1, then it becomes $1.2 trillion in and around the time of the next federal election. And for those of us who know what the consequences of debt is for a country, look at countries like Greece, look at a whole bunch of other ones around the world, we know that eventually, when it comes knocking, there's going to be problems. In fact, tomorrow will also be an interesting economic document that will be the Victorian budget. You see, they have operated under this modern Labor idea of modern monetary thinking, which essentially means that governments can rack up as much debt as possible because it's good debt. Now, of course, the good debt would normally be spent on things like infrastructure, but increasingly, the Australian federal budget, in fact, almost 40% of the Australian federal budget is paying off welfare. We also know that many, if not most, of the major promises that were made by the government at the last election were all going to increase that amount of debt. In Victoria, they've played this politics for a long time and it has worked electorally for them for a long time. But the results are now going to be that public servants are going to get the chop tomorrow. There will probably be a whole series of tax increases, and we'll see how this looks like on the other side. Because one thing that is absolute about this Labor Party that has been handsomely re-elected in Canberra is that they are going to follow the triangle of dependence. This is where you either work for the government, so any suggestion on cutting back on public servants is enough to scare a significant part of the population. You are reliant on the government for a handout, and therefore any change to the amount of handouts somehow can be written up as a threat to your handout. Or if you're in private business, then the biggest customer to your private business is the government.